So hello again, everybody. My name is Dennis Baker. I'm the Business Program Director. As we jump in, I'd just like to inform you guys and everyone watching, a big reason we do these is encourage our audience to create their own work from hearing from people who've done it and survived and have stories to tell about it. So let's jump into that. I'll have you guys introduce yourself and what you did on this project.
Yeah, I'm Michael Curtis Johnson. I was the director and co-writer on it.
And I'm Tomas Pais. I was a co-writer, and I played a part in the film. Yeah.
Nice. As we know, it takes an army village to make a film happen, so any cast or crew in the audience you want to give shout-outs to?
Yeah,
We have
a couple.
two over here.
Yeah.
We have Thomas Evans, who plays Sydney's father.
Pops.
And the incomparable Chad Morton, who
Chad
plays
Diabetes.
And I think that's everybody, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Congrats to you guys as well as our panelists. Let's jump into it. It starts with story and script because you can't make a film without that. So first, kind of talk about how the story kind of percolated, how that come to be, and then kind of writing process.
So I wrote it as a short film originally. There was something about the father and son dynamic, something about that story that spoke to me on a personal level. And I wanted to tell it and wanted to make it contemporary. It wasn't very good, but apparently, I mean, I think there was something there. And I brought it to Mike. Mike and I have been friends for a long time. We've collaborated before, and obviously he was the perfect fit for the idea. And then he took it and turned it into what it is now, which I'll let you sort of talk about.
Yeah, I mean, when we were adapting it into the feature-length version, I think kind of a little bit what I did was, the way I thought about it was we've known each other for 10 years. I kind of knew some of his strengths. And so I think some of the stuff for the character, I just kind of, from my part, tried to put more in that I knew he was really great at. And I think just kind of the two of us knowing each other so well, kind of making it comfortable to kind of let him just kind of own that character and then run with it after the script was done. So
We talk a lot about with filmmakers that transition from short film to feature film. So in that writing, what was that transition for you? You were like, okay, how do we get this small story to a bigger scale story and yet still tell what we want to say or that kind of thing?
We actually shot a short film that was kind of in the same world before we shot this. We did it really quick. We didn't spend anything on it. And we never really showed it anywhere to anyone. He played a completely different character, but we kind of still liked the world it existed in. And I think that kind of gave us the confidence to know that we could do this type of film, do it cheap, do it fast. I mean, we shot this film in 10 days. We shot the short in like 2. So it's like, I think that just kind of gave us the confidence to know we could just kind of jump into it and go. So I think, but doing the short was good, but not necessarily as like a calling card or not necessarily to show anyone. It just kind of gave us the confidence to do this.
Talk a little bit about, did you guys write in partners? Did you guys write together, separate? How kind of that process, what was that like?
I'd given him everything that I'd written, every word, every note that I had taken in my process, in my however many months of work that I'd put into this little 15-page script, whatever it was, and he just took it from there. I had sent it out to other people, and I'd gotten some notes on it, and I'd also send those off to him. And then Mike, we were kind of like creating deadlines for ourselves, I think, which was really important right from the get-go. I was like, hey, if we're gonna do this, let's make sure that we set deadlines for ourselves, because especially when you're trying to make something like turning into a short into a feature film, sometimes the idea of making something so much bigger becomes the reason why it never exists. Like you never execute, just because you have this idea and it becomes bigger than yourself, and then you don't. It just becomes the reason not to do it, and that's been something that I think we've all struggled with as artists. And so we set deadlines for ourselves. It's okay, all right, first draft in 2 weeks. 3 days later, we had 90-something pages. So I knew we were onto something really good. And that was really all just him. And then we talked about, we had discussions about the script later on. We'd go to sit at the coffee shop for hours and to talk about it and talk about the characters. But it was more of just discussions, and then he would go back in and work through it. And it was really all Mike's.
Right, and that was a big
Mike's
part about it. Like, we didn't do any rehearsals or anything like that, whether it was with Edward and him, the kid. It really was just more of like just talking about the characters. I think everyone in the film, I think, is playing a character. No one is playing a version of themselves. But I think in a way, I wouldn't say it's exactly like television, but I think everyone kind of like just owned their character. So it's like when we got on set, we were shooting so quickly, we really were only doing like 2 or 3 takes. And so like everything kind of had to move quick, and it just had to kind of be a trust of like, we know this person can do it. They're going to come in and do whatever they're going to do, and then we're going to react to it. And I think in a lot of ways it helped having Tomas as a co-writer and as a producer and as the lead actor, because he's in every scene. So even within the scenes, he could kind of dictate, and help kind of direct too, because he knows this character. He lived as him for a couple months, and so I just think it kind of elevated the performances of everyone around him, because he just knew this lead character so well. So.
When did you kind of know in the writing process of like, okay, we have something that we're ready to move forward, start pre-production, kind of start that ball continuously run rolling that's beyond the writing process? Kind of when did you guys know for that?
For me, it was that moment, that first time that after it was like 3 days later and we had something that was actually good. I was like, okay, it obviously needs work, a little bit of work, but we really are onto something. And it was really the first time that I felt so strongly about something. I was like, we have to make this film, no matter what we do. If we have to make it for $0 over like a couple of weekends, whatever it takes. This is it. Like, and it was also, I think, at a point in our lives too, where we were both a bit like the character, which I think was why the character kind of had a little bit of this thing, which was, do we still want to do this? We've been struggling at this for however many years, and this feels like maybe the last time that we're going to be able to do something that really means something to us and that is personal and that is actually good, maybe, hopefully. And so it really felt like it was do or die. This could be our swan song. Like, this could be it for us, but it had to get done. But it was, for me at least, it was after after 3 days, and he's just like, here it is. I was like, okay, we're on to something, and it boosted my confidence for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was just being like, I wouldn't recommend this all the time, but it's like, we didn't have a perfect script, and but I think as we kept developing the script and Tomas kept developing the character, you just kind of leave yourself open to the idea of, okay, what locations can I get? Well, that's where that scene's going to take place. When we were shooting it, like, we didn't even have enough money to finish it as we were shooting it. We just started shooting it. And I think just the momentum of moving forward gets people excited and gets people interested. So people were like, when you're in it and you're like, I really need a life raft, it's harder to get somebody to like pay for it before you go to the beach. But if they see you kind of drowning, they'll throw it out to you. So yeah, we kind of like that was kind of our philosophy. It's just like, as we started going and as we started swimming, like, people just started kind of coming along with us and helping out.
Yeah, and to speak to the I don't recommend doing this. I also don't recommend doing this, but if it's between doing it and not doing it, do this. Like, either do this or like aspire for, more production time and more shooting days and more money, obviously. But if it's between, struggling to get it done or not getting it done, definitely struggle to get it done however you can. That's how we felt about it.
So who was the first call beyond you two to go, okay, we need some producers on board, department heads? Like, obviously you guys probably knew a lot of people, so who were your calls to go, okay, who's going to say yes?
Family members?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first call as far as like the few people that you think could throw some money into it. But then after that, it's I went to AFI, so I mean, there's different things you can say about it, but there is definitely this kind of atmosphere of collaboration. So it's like, I've worked with my DP for 10 years. So it's like, I know I'm going to call her and I'm not going to pay her very well, but she's going to come and do it. But we also like, we had never produced anything before, and we didn't have a producer before we got started. So I'm shocked that it actually kind of worked out, because we are not conducive to doing that.
I'm never doing that again.
Right. And so, but we did bring someone on who like played more of a role of like the line producer, kind of got the production on. He was great at that and settled that. But I think, you know, when you start doing a film like this, you just start doing whatever you can do and grabbing whatever assets and resources you can get. It's like, you know, Tom had been in a film that I did in film school, I think in 2009. So it's like I had worked with him on multiple, I think a couple times, right? Yeah, like 2 or 3, 4 times. So it's like I think like having that kind of stable of great actors that I had worked with, who I knew we could trust, and then, you know, help the process too. So
I used to work in bars, so I knew a lot of people just from working in bars. Called in a lot of. No, I've been in LA for 14 years, and you know they always say like build relationships when you're in this town. And those are the times when those things pay off. It's just like, hey, I'm making a movie, and people they want to get involved, they want to help. And like you said, you know, once you're at the beach, it's easy to get people to like come to the party. Right. It's just go to the beach and then invite people. Don't like say, hey, I'm going to go to the beach. Well, you want to come with me? No, just go there, start a party, and then people will show up.
So you said you started without having all the money. How much? What was the process of raising whatever money you had before you started production? Did you guys do the Kickstarter route, or you just kind of do the family route? Did you do the credit card route? Just talk a little bit about how you started that.
Yeah, I can't say exactly how much we spent on it, but it's not very much at all. And I felt like the best way still is we ended up doing a crowdsourcing campaign after we shot it. So at least we could show people like, all right, we've done it. Now we need that little bit of money to get to X Film Festival. And so we raised a pretty good chunk of money doing that after the fact. But I think as far as like shooting the film, I still found it easier. I think a general rule is like it's easier to go to like a smaller group of people, ask for a slightly larger amount than trying to like piece together everything. I would recommend doing that on the back end of things. Like, I know it's not easy for everyone, doesn't have like a rich uncle or something like that, but it's still like, I just feel like making 20 phone calls is so much less effective than making like those 1 or 2 that you can just really put everything into that. So, but it wasn't much. We didn't raise much at all.
Let's talk a little bit about casting for our actors in the room. Did you guys, obviously, you wrote with the character in mind for yourself. Was there any other, like you talked about other actors, did you write with the actors in mind, or did you just write and then figure out what kind of actors you had around that fit?
There were two roles that I had written for friends that I knew of when I thought we were doing it as a short, and it would have to be like asking favors of friends. Once we got into the casting process, and you know, Mike was involved, and then we had a producer involved, and there were more people sort of had their say. And I had those friends come in and audition. They weren't as good as some of the other people, unfortunately. And we had to cast other people for those roles because they were just better actors. Jad.
Yeah. So that was like that role was written for someone else, and he was really good too. Like, I think this other actor was great too, but we were still kind of like, we should really check out a few more people. It's an important role. And saw Chad, and it was like, yeah, that's our Diomedes. Like, there was definitely people like, Tom's role was, I think, written very much for him, at least in my mind, always. So there's a few characters like that, but for the most part, we did do a pretty decent amount of casting. Edward, we cast him, the kid. I think we went one day of casting. We got pretty lucky with him. We were going to go with a different kid. We met Edward. We loved his physicality. We loved his look. We liked his personality. But he seemed like a little bit nervous about the process. So we were going to go with someone else. We decided to do a callback anyway. Edward came back, and it was funny because in the time between the first audition and the second audition, Tomas looked like this in the first audition and was just a nice Tomas, but then he did the sort of method thing, had become Sydney, and for some reason, like, Edward was more comfortable with Sydney than he was with Tomas, and so they got along really well, and that's kind of where that relationship started. And then from there, it's like I didn't have to do anything. They were just like, they were buddies, they were pals, and they kind of just like went along together. And for me, it was just I wouldn't say it was like a chaperone or hall monitor, but it was just like that's pretty much what it was. It was the person that said stop sometimes, but they were just on
a side note, we got really lucky with the kid, because people will search far and wide trying to find a kid actor, and they'll audition hundreds and hundreds of kids from everywhere, and we must have seen maybe 15 20 at the most. And we found him, and it was his first time acting in something, and it was just like, what? Like,
Got that out, yeah.
I mean, I always say this in Q&As. I'm always like, I hope to be as good of an actor as he is one day. He's so wonderful. It was such a joy to work with.
And that was the last thing, and I've told this story a few times too. Like, Edouard's Swiss French, like English isn't even his first language. Like, one of the things that's interesting about him, like, people will tell you with kids, like, you should cast a kid, you should get them to play themselves, you should get them comfortable, you should over-rehearse them, you just get them to this place where they can just be. So it's almost like they're just like, you know, a version of themselves. And like, Edouard wasn't like that. He was like an actor like any other actor we worked with. We never condescended to him. You know, we spoke to him like any other actor. He had his own process. You know, I've said this before, like, we would forget lines and he would tell us what those lines were, you know, like, and he was just the sponge. And so I think like I think that made it work too, because it's like you could have a kid who's bouncing off the walls. Like, he would show up, he had his little script, he had his notes written on it, you know, like, he was an actor. He's a professional. He's not just like a kid who came and played, like, he came to work, you know.
Congrats on that. Other side of the table, as an actor, sometimes that can be a little weird, or sometimes you can learn a lot as well. So for enlighten us, for our audience, what did you observe that would be benefit for actors to know about auditioning, being on that other side of the table? What would you encourage them to know or remember?
I mean, nothing that you wouldn't learn in an acting class, but just the people that would impress us the most in the audition room were the people who just they made a decision they made a choice. And whatever those choices were bold in some way or another. Whether they were the right choices or not, it showed us that they were able to make choices and commit to them and make them believable. And you know, you're not always going to like be the person when you walk in the door that a casting person is looking for. Like, we didn't necessarily, but it was through like, hey, those are interesting choices, and then let's try it this way, and then they were able to adjust. That's what for me, and I think for Mike as well, that's what I think spoke to us the most, is just the ability to make choices, make them bold and be creative, and then also be adaptable and listen to direction.
I'm going to change the question a little bit for you, Michael, as a director's point of view. And this is not an easy question. How do you know when you know? How do you know, like, okay, this is the person we're going to say yes to? You might have had 5 wonderful choices, but this is the one.
I mean, in this particular case, I mean, I felt like there were individuals who just kind of stood out, and it almost kind of seemed serendipitous that it happened. But going off of what Tomas said, I mean, knowing the way that at least it worked out for us in getting this film made, like, I really do believe that this is a grind. It's not, no one's like, even overnight, everyone puts the prep work in. And I think it's not, maybe not the advice for everybody, but I do think it's like, make a choice when you're going into the room, do something that's interesting, because I've known people who've auditioned for, I had just shot my second film this past summer, and we had people one of our lead actors came in for a different role, and he was great, but he just wasn't right for it. And we had someone drop out, but like, he had made such an impression on that other role that, you know, we brought him in to do the second role. So I just think, like, people are going to remember you. They're going to remember the choices. You might not be right for that role, but as long as you're making that impression and you're making these relationships with people, you know, it's going to work. And so it's like the audition room isn't always about getting that part. It's about getting your face seen, making those relationships, meeting those people so they'll remember you the next time, you know, you come in for something.
So to give us a little context as we move in and talk about production, from that first draft where you knew to the day of first day of production, how long was that process for you guys?
A few weeks.
Like,
it was so fast. I mean, it was a
like
couple of months.
2 months.
It was like 2 months.
Yeah.
Oh, super fast.
But it went super fast.
Nice.
Yeah,
So 2
it was.
months.
I remember it was. It was right after Halloween, I think, was when I finished the script. By Thanksgiving, we had our initial seed money to we're like, okay, we're making this film. And then it was the week of Sundance that year and a half ago. So it would have been late January. So late January, we were in production. We were shooting.
Wow. And so then, as you said, you had 10 days of production. Talk a little bit about maybe locations. Where did you guys shoot? Kind of talk about adapting locations, finding them.
Right. I mean, we shot most of the stuff within like a couple mile radius of where I live. We shot Sydney's apartment was Tomas's apartment.
I had just moved in.
Yeah,
it was
just
empty.
moved in.
It was perfect.
Diomedes' home is my house with my wife. And then like, so it's, we were using just any place we knew we could kind of get. So that fell into a little bit. And then other ones were just like, you know, people talk about LA and being, you know, it's hard to get locations and you pay things, but I also think that's another thing with relationships, like Tomas for preparation. There's a bar called the New Jalisco, which is a drag bar downtown. It's kind of one of the last like dive drag bars. Like it's, you know, and so Tomas was hanging out there, you know, getting to know the ladies. And I think just him having his face there every day, he was able to kind of talk to the owners and get like in their good graces. And I think at the end of it, we paid like $600 for the location for 2 days. So it's like, you know, having that, you know, having those relationships, you know, not necessarily taking no and then being persistent, but just being around, like, you know, going to people and just like really showing them how enthusiastic you are and how excited you are to do something, you know, kind of can have an effect on people. They like, that's, you know, people feed off that too, and they see you're excited about something and they're more willing to help. I think it's just harder when you kind of go in and be like, I've got this, you know, random project, and, you know, as long as you can make people feel like a part of something, they're a little bit more willing to kind of join in.
Nice. Well, maybe that's a good transition, Tomas, to talk a little bit about your prep, the community that you kind of built relationship with to kind of understand the role and just kind of get into it.
The most important work that I for myself, and I would argue for most actors, is the work that I do on my own, just like personal work, whether it's reading, whether it's at a computer, research, you know, just kind of like my own personal stuff. And then outside of that, especially because, you know, like there was very clear that there was a story that needed to be told, and I wanted to make sure that every choice that I made, whether it was a character choice or, you know, the way I dressed or the way I acted or any characterizations, you know, speech pattern, whatever, that all of it had to make sense, right? It all was in service of the character and then ultimately in service of the story. So that's all the work that goes into preparing this character, like on my own time. Outside of that, I didn't want to spend too much time in like the really nice, the really sort of popular drag bars and that culture, because the character was a bit of an outsider in that world. He was in it, but it was because for the wrong reasons sometimes, but also because he, you know, as much as he enjoyed the crowd, he enjoyed being in front of an audience, it was always kind of like he was settling for that because he couldn't be a rock star. And so the place that we had in mind for the film, when I started researching it, realizing that there's a place like that here, I was like, well, I have to go hang out there and check out the shows. And that's what that place is. Like we recreated the exact scene of what that place was. And then just kind of like understanding who this guy was and like the kind of people he surrounded himself with, the kind of places he would go, and just, I used to work in bars, so I kind of know a little bit of the nightlife in LA, and sort of immersing myself in, to a certain degree. Obviously, like, you have to have limits for yourself as a person. You know, as much as you're an actor, you can commit yourself to a role as wholeheartedly. There are certain limits that I have as a human being. So to certain, you know, so like as far as like drugs and that kind of thing, like I didn't, you know, indulge too much in that. But just sort of like being around those types of people and being around that sort of energy, it affects you. It affects you, and it gets in there. And if nothing else, if you're paying attention, you can pick up on mannerisms, you can pick up on physicalities from other people, and that's ultimately that's what I'm getting to, is it's like observing, taking notes, and absorbing. So I hope that's
great. Energy was the word I was thinking of when you were talking about that, so it's great. That's wonderful. Talk a little bit about those 10 days in the sense of what things went wrong that you had to fix, what unexpected things happened. Kind of give us a behind the scenes glimpse and maybe some scenes where you're like, okay, this was the plan, but once we got there, X and Y and Z happened.
I don't remember. Do you remember any disastrous things happening?
I don't remember much about anything.
Yeah.
Or to be honest,
not even disastrous, but unexpected, or just stuff where like we had to rearrange a couple things from the original plan.
The only thing that I can think of was that we'd finished shooting, and I was about to get my hair cut. And so I was like, I'm, and that's another thing. Just real quick, I do want to touch up on this, especially because this is the SAG-AFTRA Foundation as an actor. Something that you don't hear about very often, you don't see very often when you watch interviews of actors and actors talking about their process and acting, is what you don't really hear often is what happens once they say cut and it's over, production's over. That was hands down, it was one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with, was like trying to come out of that world and out of that character and back into just being myself. And I could talk about that for hours, which I'm not going to, but that's a thing. It's a thing, and apparently actors don't talk about it enough. So that being said, we were finished shooting, and I was like, I got to get rid of this hair because it's just like, it feels like the last thing that's like keeping me in there. And I was like, are you sure I can cut my hair? Because there is no wigging this situation. There's no like, and then finally I was like, wait, did we ever shoot that scene in the alleyway when we were talking about the heavy metal show? And he was like, holy shit. and so luckily we've realized, it was like, I canceled my hair appointment for like 30 minutes later, and we scheduled it for the next day, and we shot that one scene because it was an important scene. I was like, we can't cut around that. That's the only thing that I feel like went really, like, could have gone really wrong. Besides that, I think it all happened so fast.
Yeah, and I think like one of the reasons I would say too we didn't freak out about anything or nothing happened is like, I think, you know, at least for me as a filmmaker, and don't try to be so precious about things, and I leave room for just if you're reacting to things more, and if it's a classic improv thing. If you're saying yes or you're listening more, it's better than trying to kind of impose any type of thing specifically. So I think like, you know, you don't, if you trust the people you're working with, you know, Tomas never did anything where I was just like, oh God, that isn't right. Like, let's do that again. Let's do it this way. Let's do it that way. Like, and if you trust the people you're working with, it was like DP puts on a lens that you weren't expecting. And if you're just not like, no, that's not what I was thinking, you know, if you don't get all kind of caught up in those things and you trust the people you're working with, and there's really nothing kind of to freak out about, you know, because you don't have any expectation for what exactly something's supposed to be. And I think that's just kind of at the heart of collaboration, period. You know.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about post-production. How did you, or the reverse of that, how did you not, in pre-production and production, set yourself up for post-production?
We didn't set ourselves up for post-production.
Excellent. So let's
yeah, and so, but that was one of the things too, where I felt like finance-wise, it helped knowing that we could do post, you know, after the fact. We did a Indiegogo campaign. That's, you know, not. There's no shame in it. There's no shame in it, but it's like work. It's almost weird. You're like putting yourself on the internet every day. You're just constantly talking about it. So it almost becomes this other job. And like, I feel like if you're doing that before you do a film, it's like it takes away all your attention from the creative process because it is like its own thing. And so I feel like having that afterwards made it a little bit easier to do that. But it's also like, I do think it's good to plan for post stuff, because I think in some ways it's like, you know, if you know where you're going for sound, you know, like I'm not completely happy with everything, and you know what you're going to do with music, and you know, the licensing things can be crazy. It's just like knowing some of these things you can't know until you do them and go through them. But you can learn these things before you do it sometimes. And we probably could have been a little bit more proactive with some of that. Like just asking more people who had done it before. Like, how did you do this? What did you run into? As opposed to just being like, oops, like that's going to happen, or this thing happened, or
and we lucky,
forgot this.
We were lucky as well that we submitted, after we shot the film, before we did any post-production, we sent a rough cut of the film to IFP, which is the Independent Filmmakers Program, which is kind of the East Coast version of Film Independent here on the West Coast. And so there are a lot of these institutions that have labs and programs. What they do is it's a post-production lab that lasts a whole year. And so they basically walk you through everything you need to do in order to get your film finished after you've shot it. It's like a crash course in post-production, but that takes over a year. And they were amazing. It was. I mean, I don't know how we would have gotten the film done without their support and their help and their guidance as well. And those types of programs exist all over the country. Like Sundance Institute has their programs, their labs, you know, and then there's smaller regional ones. So that's also a resource to take advantage of. Pre-production, post-production, you know, there's tons of stuff like that. You just got to do the research and apply.
Did you have your editor on board from the beginning, or did you, after you shot, then got the editor on board?
Well, the editing was weird. Like the editor that we'd worked with kind of fell through last second, and so I did an assembly of the film myself. Then we brought in an editor after who kind of chipped away at it a little bit. But But that's another thing. I mean, whether it comes to being an actor or a director or anything, I learned editing on this, and I learned editing on the short film we did, and that was after, you know, I had knew a little bit about editing, but that was after, you know, being, you know, I went to AFI, graduated from AFI in 2008. You know, I couldn't edit my own stuff, and so that kind of limits your possibilities, you know. So I think any kind of skill that you can acquire technically, whether it's knowing how to use a camera, knowing how to edit your material, like you'll see in the end, like just how much that's going to save you, and then also just how much you can do on your own. You know, I can sit on a computer and mess around with that stuff for hours, you know. So it's like, yeah, I think just like learning other skills as you move along. Like writing is a huge important part of acting, I think, you know, like creating material for yourself, you know. This wouldn't exist without Tomas, you know, creating this kind of role that he wanted to do, you know. So I just think that's so important as an actor, as opposed to waiting for the right role to come to you, to like create that role yourself, you know.
And that said, you got to know your limitations as well. I wouldn't have been able to make this film by myself. So, you know, build relationships. Luckily, we're friends as well, but like nurture those relationships, you know. And yeah, so I would the film. It's a collaborative process as well, and so know where your limitations are. That's important, and know who to seek out and who to reach out to in order to like complement whatever you're bringing to a project.
I don't want to gloss over the IFP thing because I think that's important. Talk a little bit about in that year, how hands-on were you? What are the kind of the biggest things that you learned through that process? Just let people know this is how it helped you.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say there's just a whole nother world after the film's done and after you're happy with the film. Even if you're happy with it, there's a whole nother thing that comes. And that in a lot of ways is kind of just like how you present the film, you know, how you present yourself as a filmmaker. You know, some people don't like the word like branding, but there is going to be this thing where people start to kind of see like, oh, is this the way you want people to know the type of films you want to make in the future? And so I think like that kind of helped us navigate that world almost even more than any kind of creative advice they gave us. I think there's just we were very limited in the amount of knowledge we had about like distribution and post and all of those things. And that's a very real thing. Like I think any of us want people to see our work and, you know, finding venues to do that. And I mean, the little I do know, just to let you in on it, it's like film festivals, like there's little things, like this is a little example. It's like if a film festival, if you ask them for a waiver and they don't want to give it to you, they're probably not going to probably program your film. So you can do things like you can waste tons of money. You know, I think we've played in probably 40 to 50 film festivals, and one of them we probably paid close to 15, 20 submission fees, and only one of them, Slamdance, which has a blind submission process, accepted our film. And every other festival we played at, you know, was a relationship we made. A programmer found it themselves. So there's little things like that are kind of not good to know. Like it kind of makes you feel a little icky, but it's like, but then just don't like take that knowledge and don't do that. Like don't feel like, you know, make your percentage, like play the percentages a little bit more, you know, and just having knowledge like that is useful, like very specific knowledge like that.
So then as you were finding out kind of what the story and style and maybe brand for the term you used, then were you conscious about certain festivals you're like, this film you thought would fit there or would have the community that would enjoy it? Kind of was that mindset a little bit about like the audience you knew would want resonate with this film?
One of the things that they had us do was exactly that, was map out our target audiences, the types of festivals that we thought would be appropriate for the film, where we wanted it to play. And we had our sort of, you know, our college Ivy League top 5 list, and then the ones below that where would settle for and what we were kind of like okay with. That kind of all went out the window as well too. It's like next thing you know, all these other festivals are calling you up, and you're like, who would have thought that Woods Hole would want to play? You know, like just random festivals are great festivals too, like really good ones that you just don't even. You have a plan, and it's important to know how to pitch your idea or talk about your film. That was also a big thing. That's a very practical thing that we learned, was knowing how to talk about the film and talk about yourself as a brand. Again, even though that sounds kind of icky, those are all important things. And then just, I don't know, have confidence in what you have as your film, and strive for those things, like, try to get into those festivals, and we did have a plan, but it didn't work out the way that we would have wanted it to go, but it doesn't mean that it didn't work out just as well.
Talk a little bit about your first experience in front of an audience that isn't family and friends, or you're like, what was that experience like for you? What resonated that you didn't think would resonate, or vice versa?
Was it Slamdance? Was it the first time?
I think Slamdance was the first time. It's kind of weird because I think Slamdance was almost like an audience of just like other people who were at Slamdance.
Right.
It was pretty a small group. I think the reality now is theatrical distribution is very unlikely. And I think even going into it, if you would have asked me, I would have honestly said, like, this will never play theatrically. We're never going to get theatrical release. We'll probably do VOD, something like that. But I still think, film festivals matter in the sense that I do think, it is more about speaking to a community of other people who do this, people who are working on stuff themselves, situations like this. I think there's still no substitute for like getting that experience in front of an audience, and so that's why it's awesome to see this. But the reactions across different festivals and different audiences are so different. Like the things that would always get a laugh, or the things that get no laugh in some places but we'll get them in other places, that can be a difference at the same festival or the same venue.
There were definitely laughs here tonight that I've never heard in screenings before, which was kind of awesome, because those are actually a lot of the laughs today were the times when he and I would laugh when we would watch like on our computers and stuff. We'd be like, I'm like, they get it, they get what we're doing. So other times I'm like, why are they laughing at that? That's not supposed to be funny. So this was a great audience. It was awesome.
And it's pretty wild as a filmmaker just to experience that, because it's the baby that's out of your hands, and it's in the world.
Completely out of your hands. You have to be willing to just be like, okay, it's in the world now. People are going to make it their own. It's going to be their thing. They're going to experience what they're going to experience, and you can't really feel responsible for it.
We always kind of wrap it up with a golden nugget question. So writer, director, actor, point of view. What's one thing you'd want people watching or in the audience to remember if they didn't, zoned out for the last 30 minutes? This is the one thing we're like, don't forget this, or remember this, if you're gonna remember one thing.
Just in general about our experiences as like writer, director.
Yeah.
Okay.
As the filmmakers,
You go first.
making a project.
Making the project. I mean, first and foremost, the biggest thing is do not ask for permission ever to make a film. Don't ever do that. Don't ever ask for permission, whether it comes from money, of time, of equipment. Like, that is the biggest thing that will stop you from kind of moving forward. I think for so long, we had tried to do projects before that I'm kind of glad had never gotten off the ground, but it was always that thing, like, if we just had a little bit more money, if we just had a little bit more time, if we just have that certain actor, if the script just gets a little bit better. And so many times you're just waiting for someone else to tell you, like, okay, you can do this. Like, whether it's, I need to get a manager, I need to get an agent, or I need to do this. Like, that was the biggest thing for us, is I think I felt like we were prepared to kind of do something at this point. Like, we had been working on stuff for a very long time, but if I leave with anything, if you feel ready and you do it, just don't feel like you need other people to kind of like validate that. Just do it.
Whew. Advice from an actor to actors. That's tough, man. I would say do it because if it scares you, that's when you should do it. If it's something that you're afraid of doing, then that's the moment you feel that. The moment you feel like this is scary, or I'm not sure if I can do this, that's the moment you should consciously decide, well, that's one more reason why I should go after it. Because I feel like in life, why do things that are easy? Like, do the things that are hard, because that's what challenges you as a person. And I think that's what challenges us as artists, when we're like looking for stuff that is difficult and is scary, and then you learn something about yourself, you learn something about humanity, especially as an actor, when you're sort of like diving into other characters and learning about other people. And if you're not taking risks, then why bother doing it? I guess. I hope that's
wonderful. Thank you, guys. I can feel your passion from here, and I know our audience can. So thank you for following it and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having us. You guys have been really wonderful. Thank you.